I'm Bob Bazans. I'm an alcoholic. Sober through the grace of God in AA since the 10th of December, 1967. For that, I'm very grateful. This is a cool weekend. All the Woodstocks seem to be kind of special. Lee was planted them all over the country. And the first time I came to your area and spoke, I spoke with Sandy at the retreat center. And there was something very, very special about that weekend. It was, every place you talk has a different collective consciousness. And you have, as a group of people, and what you can, how you can talk and what you can say takes both pitching and catching. You go to detox, if you're only pitching, all the balls end up on the floor at the other end. And there's something about the mentality and the consciousness of the people in this area that is alive, awake, strong. It's very cool. It is very cool. I love to watch Jimmy work. What a gift for organization he has. And we're the benefactors of that. What a great group of presenters that we got this weekend. It's very, I'm not going to go into the individually except for Sheldon, who didn't quite make it. He's working on it, though. It's the talks have been extraordinary. And again, I think some of that is due to who they're talking to. It is, as you get older, which I am, and your balls kind of top the hill and you're going down the hill a little bit, these people, one of the reasons I keep talking is to stay connected to the people that have 13 years like Rich and all the way up to Polly at 40 or whatever the number is of the oldest of us presenting. It keeps me in the game. It keeps me connected. It makes me alive. I feel younger and I feel part of it. So Jimmy was nice enough to say conversation with Bob because he didn't know what I didn't know what I had to say. First part of my talk, I'm just going to give my AA talk and I'm going to shorten it up. And I do that the first part just as kind of an identification. The second part is that 7-year experience I had where my pants caught on fire, and it's a second surrender experience I think that most of us go through. I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm one of 7 kids. I went to a Catholic military academy on a college campus. We drank in high school like most people drink in college. We had fraternities. I didn't know Catholics drank more than other people, but if we're having a contest, I'm bringing my folks. It is, and we just drank our brains out. Of my 6 closest buddies in high school, 4 of us are in Alcoholics Anonymous and 2 of the wives. We all have more than 40 years of sobriety, and we've all been married about 50 years. Those are kind of unusual statistics as you get into it. Our parents were those Second World War people who worked hard, played hard. You know, if you had less than 7 children in our neighborhood, you had a reproduction problem. I mean, we had, there were just clans. Families were friends of, you know, and, you know, they all drank their brains out. Cocktail parties were the order of the day. We stole booze from our parents starting when we were, you know, 12, 13, 14 years old, and many of us went on to develop a problem. My drinking, by the time I finished high school, my drinking problem was a really loud conversation in our home. I thought my problem was I was underage. You know, the police didn't like it, my old man didn't like it, and it seemed kind of awkward. And I had a chance to go away to school, thought my drinking problem would become normal. It did not. I drank my way out of the University of Notre Dame in the middle of my senior year. In the year, yeah, that's my story. My mother always said, "You're not very bright, Bob, dress well." And I seem to be smart enough to get in places but I'm not smart enough to finish. And I was a class drunk. I mean, it really, I look back on that. I was sober about 20 years, and they asked me to go down to Notre Dame and give an AA talk. And it was really good for me. I went down and I saw how young those people were. God, it just, and I saw what a waste. You know, Rudy, that guy, that movie, you know, he went there. I passed through. I mean, I didn't attend classes. I was, you know, I gambled. I mean, I was the jerk in the class. And when I was due to be commissioned, I had to get a medical release. The medical release I got was for alcoholism. I was diagnosed an alcoholic when I was 19. That seemed goofy. I mean, it just seemed goofy to me, but I ran into a psychiatrist that knew a lot about alcoholism, and he diagnosed me. I came home to a set of very disappointed parents. I finished school at a local university, and when I finished school, my dad asked me to leave home. He said, "We love you, but we don't know what the hell to do with you." And I got a job at a liquor store. It's important to use your gifts. Now I'm the jerk at the liquor store. I'm, you know, stealing booze, and I get fired for getting in trouble with the truck. I took a job as a waiter. This is the last year of my drinking. I'm waiting to see what the hell the service is going to do. The Vietnam War is on. I'm going to get drafted. Now I'm A1, and, or 1A, whatever they call it. And I take a job as a waiter. I'm living kind of on Skid Row, $10 a night rooms. I'm shacked up with different waiters and waitresses, and I'm drinking, I don't know, close to a fifth a day. I wake up in the morning, drink 2 or 3 beers. I go to work at 10, work from 10 to 1. At 1, I go to a bar and drink from 1 to 5, and at 5, I go buy a pint. And no one knows where I am, and that is just A-okay with me. Then I went to a party one night. I got my face kicked in. I got fired, and I was tapped. I had no place to go, and I went back to my family and asked if I could move back in the house. They allowed me to move back in the house on the condition that, I'm sure I promised that, but I've been drinking about a fifth a day for a year, and then you stop suddenly. It never occurred to me that you'd get in trouble, and I started to hallucinate and get in trouble, so I went back to drinking. When I moved back in the house, I made the largest full court press at trying to stop being the family jerk. I got back together with Linda. Honey, would you stand? That lady just celebrated 50 years in Al-Anon in August. And, I was loaded the night I went to a party. She had a date. I went into the party. I'm just a slob. And I go over and ask her if she'd get together with me the next day. And I got together with you the next day and asked if we could get back together and seriously consider marriage. And she said, yes. And at the time, she was a psychiatric nurse working in an alcohol ward. So while she's attractive, she's one sandwich short of a picnic. I mean, it is, you know, it is, so. We have 3 children that are in sobriety. They have 75 years between the 3 of them. So my wife is a carrier. I have turned her into New York. None of us were alcoholic when we met her, and we think there's an issue. So I get back together with Linda. The service loses my file, asks me to take the physical again. I take the physical for the 4th time, and I fail it, so now I don't have to go to Vietnam. I get a job as a trainee at a manufacturing concern. I buy a car, and I think, wow, I'm going to be grown up. Only I can't quit drinking. And just before I went back to my senior year at Notre Dame, I got in some trouble. I was beaten up, robbed, I was rolled, I was pistol whipped, I was shot at, I was thrown out of the 2nd story of an apartment, ended up in a state of shock, long story, but I ended up in the psych ward. They're not going to let me go back to school. I talked my way out of that. I go back to school. I don't drink for a couple of months. And it never occurred to me that if the heat was on and I really wanted to quit, that I couldn't quit. So now I'm engaged and married, I get this job, and I'm the company drunk. I'm in a research department, all engineers, and I was in civil engineering at Notre Dame. I hated engineering, and now I'm falling asleep at my desk. I use my sick leave up in the first 2 months at work. I'm sleeping my hangovers off in the dark room. When I went back to make amends to the guy who hired me, he said, "God, you interviewed so well." And I said, "Yeah, we do. We have a performance issue, but we interview well." And I quit that job at about 6 months, and I took a sales job, and I had the sales job about 3 or 4 weeks, and a buddy of ours got married, and I went out on a 4-day drunk. And I woke up Thursday, July 1967, hugging the toilet, doing my morning exercise. And that was my moment. I was so sick and tired of me. The mystery for why I seemed reasonably well equipped in life and never could put it together was just tearing me apart. And I called AA, which had been recommended to me for some time. I got the old timer down at the central office. He sent 2 guys out to this restaurant in our neighborhood, and I met these 2 guys at 6 o'clock on a Thursday night. One guy had 6 months, one guy had 6 years. They sat me down in the booth. They said, "We're from Alcoholics Anonymous. We had a drinking problem. We found an answer for it. I want to share it with you. If it helps you, that's terrific. But if it doesn't help you, don't worry about it. Talking to guys like you helps us." And they told me their story. My family had put me in front of every kind of help a young person could get. Medical and religious and legal and psychiatric and psychology. But I never talked to another person who had a drinking problem. Within 45 minutes, I'm sharing things with those guys that I never shared with anybody. Those 2 men changed my life by telling me their story. We have many traditions in AA, but the most wonderful one of which is that we share our experience, strength, and hope, not our belief, not our psychology, not our dogma. And when you share your story with another person, they may not want to go to AA, but they can't walk away saying what you said wasn't so. Most drunks have a very good BS detector, and if you stick to your experience and stick to your story, it makes an impression. And those 2 men made a big impression on me, and I met my sponsor at my first meeting of AA. And he was a 12-step, his name was Warren McGinley. He was a 12-step champion of the Uptown group of Alcoholics Anonymous. He did more 12-step work than anybody else in the group, and I got to be his wingman. And I got to be his wingman because his wife worked with my grandma. Just, seconds and inches, why you get lucky enough to. Warren sat me down in a chair. So our groups in Minnesota, 99% of the meetings were closed step discussion groups. All we talk about were the steps. We go to the meeting, you got the step, you talk 7 minutes on the step, and then we break up into 2 groups, upstairs and downstairs, and we finish the meeting talking about how the steps relates to what we're doing today. And my sponsor sat me down in a chair, and he said, "Alcoholism is a disease." I did not know that. I don't know what the hell I thought it was. He said, "It's physical, but it's also mental and spiritual." He said, "What we do in AA once we take our last drink, or our last drug, we use the 12 steps to change, to find a different way to live that's better than the way we lived before, so we don't have to go back to drugs or booze, to do something for us that we're unwilling or unable to do for ourselves. If you don't change, you won't stay." Gettysburg Address of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I drank twice after walking in the front door of AA. I drank after 30 days on a business trip to the West Coast. And I had about 90 days when we got married, and I drank on our honeymoon. You know where the divers dive off those cliffs in Mexico? I dove off those cliffs in Mexico. I'm in the audience watching a world's high diving contest. I thought, God, that's not so tough. I won't explain all the details, but I dove off the public landing, climbed up to about 95 feet. I could split my swimsuit, cut my leg. My wife's going absolutely nuts at this ass up on top of this. I can't move. I'm stuck. I can't get up. I can't go any higher, and I can't go down. I'm watching the waves, and I'm trying to decide whether to jump or dive. Finally figured out, to hell with it, and I dove. God watches after fools and drunks, because I made it. If I would have jumped, I would have died. You have to get out 32 feet to hit the center of that channel. And you can't jump that far. You can dive that far, but you can't jump that far. 10 years later, we're down there with the kids on vacation. It's our 10th anniversary, and she gives me this card of the picture of the chasm at La Quebrada and said, "There but for the grace of God." And we're watching the diver. I said, "God, that's the dumbest thing I've ever done." She said, "It's not even in the top 10. I don't know how you can share a life and kind of, 30 years ago or so, I was gaining weight and I wanted to get in shape, so I thought I'd get a bike, and I got a Harley. And I kind of had to ask for forgiveness rather than permission on that one. So I had my last drink on the airplane on the way home, and turned myself into my sponsor, and I've been sober since that. My gift is I loved AA since the moment I walked in the front door. I love it more today than I did but the welcome I got from those 30 men and 2 women, Rose and Helen. This was kind of a club, but all they did was have meetings. There were just 2 meetings a night in this old bar upstairs and downstairs. And there were about 2 women in each group. There weren't many women back in those days. One Friday night had more. And they were really an attractive group of people. No one told me I was too young. I'm 23, and they just accepted me, and not an issue about it. And I started my journey in Alcoholics Anonymous. And my thinking was kind of like, okay, I buy it. I'm an alcoholic. My sponsor told me I diagnosed myself, go to a dozen meetings, you'll figure it out. I figured it out, thought I was an alcoholic. And I thought, okay, I buy it. But if I'm an alcoholic and you got the answer for alcoholism, I got a dozen other issues that are going on in my life, and if I got the problem and you got the answer, those ought to go away. And hell, it might take a year. It might take 50 is what the hell I'm kind of finding out right now. So my life was significantly unmanageable. I couldn't get up in the morning. I had trouble getting to work, I had trouble staying at work, and I had trouble working at work. Other than that, I was a pretty good worker. I've got a gambling problem. More of a hobby. It's 4 or 5 hours a day, 4 or 5 days a week. It's not a big deal. And but I'm making, 7, 8, 10 grand a year playing backgammon. It was like a second job. And I'm spending more money than I make. I've always been a money spender. And if you do that over a long period of time, you end up in debt. I just want to report that to you in case that. And newly married, in my early sobriety, and my wife, we're seeing less of each other now that we're married than we did when we were courting. So we're like ships passing in the night. She's getting up at 6 o'clock to go to work. I come home most nights and she broils something because all she knows how to do is broil. And she's got a rotation of 3 things that she does. I eat fast. I go to the meeting early. The meeting's from 8 to 9, and I come home at 11:30 at night, and she's asleep. And when she leaves the house, then she starts to wonder if one of the places I'm supposed to practice the program is in our home. I thought, God, that's none of your business. I mean, you've got your program, and I've got mine. We're not supposed to, so. I had all those issues in my first inventory, and none of those issues that I just shared with you made my first inventory. My first inventory was a recitation of the worst things that I had done, the separators, the thing that made me feel like a moral leper. And I didn't have a very good sense of my, we did a lot of great talks on 4 and 5 and the inventory and how you should kind of find out your defects of character in that process. I did not. I just did not. And over the next year and a half, I got my defects of character and shortcomings and unmanageabilities handed to me one by one. And by the end of my second and third year, I had a pretty good list. And I was working on them. I care about how I live my life, but I made almost no progress whatsoever on that list. By my 4th year, they're starting to bother the hell out of me. In my 5th, 6th, and 7th year, I'm in trouble. And I get to the beginning of my 8th year, and I'm not thinking about drinking, but I'm thinking about putting a gun in my mouth. This is a story of my life. I mean, I'm the youngest guy in the group for 2 years. Everybody's patting me on the head, telling me what a good job I'm doing, and I'm dying. When I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I had a wall built around me. The thinking then when I'm behind the wall said, you like me, but you only like what I'll let you see about me. You could see everything about me, you'd hate me. I hate me. And when I tore that wall down, when I called AA and continued in conversation with my sponsor, I made a discovery. The discovery was that I'm not unique. My personality may be unique, but not my illness, behavior, experience, feelings. And I started to have a sense of hope that what worked for you could work for me. Most of us come in there with a profound sense of difference, and if we don't modify that to some degree, we'll look for the differences rather than the we won't identify. And but I'm a great starter, and I don't finish anything. I had the highest marks in our class when we went down to Notre Dame. I'm the only guy of the 14 of us that didn't finish. That's the story of my life. I'm a great starter and a poor finisher. And my issue was that I'm feeling like I'm a really lame member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I've got all the merit badges. I'm going to more meetings than anybody else, and I'm giving talks. I'm sponsoring guys. But my life is very problematic. And I'm telling my sponsor 65% of what's going on. And I know in New Jersey you tell 100, and I think that's really terrific. But the fact was that I'm only telling myself 65% of what's going on. Life is lived forward, but it's understood backwards. When you don't see it until you're through it, and you sure as hell don't understand it when you're in it. And I knew that I had to find out what God had to do with Wednesday. I had great examples. One of the things that saved my bacon is I love the old timer, and I spent a lot of time around the older guys in the group. And but my problem was, I go knock on the door, and God says, "Who's there?" I say, "God, it's Bob. What do you want?" What do I want? I'm 8 years sober, and my pants are on fire. I need help. Will you help? Yeah, I'll help. Then I'm going to ask God what all your sponsees ask you when they show up at your house with that bushel basket full of manure. What do I do? Because that's what we want to know. That's the question that we all want to know. Wrong question. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure what God's going to tell Bob to do. Get up in the morning, go to work, stay at work at work. Get on a budget, which is an Al-Anon term. It's not in our book. It's a very harsh word. Be kind and loving to your wife and children and stop gambling. I mean, that's the list. So how the hell, I said, what the hell do you think I've been trying to do for the last 8 years? If I could do all those things, I wouldn't need God. I'm here because I need help. And my idea was I can't go to God until I clean up 2 or 3 or 4 of the issues that I'm dealing with in my life. And I never got cleaned up on 2 or 3 or 4. And finally, out of desperation, I went back to the steps. And I had been through the steps formally twice, and this is my 3rd time through, and I'm 7.5 or 8 years sober. Step 1, powerless and unmanageable, an absolute no-brainer. I mean, it's obvious to me, and it's obvious to my spouse, it's obvious to everybody who knew anything about the details of my life. And what shocked me as I started to go through the second step is I had lost the second step. I believed it for you, and I believed it for us, and I no longer believed it for me, because I'm on the down escalator going up. I'm the guy who's going to 6 meetings a week, sponsoring guys, giving talks, active in service, and my life has gone backwards, which is my story. And I think when you're in trouble, you get more or less active. I got more active. I started to see people with bigger problems than I had with, walking through the walls I was trying to avoid with dignity and grace, and I came to believe that God would restore Bob to sanity. I reclaimed the second step. I took step 3 on my knees with my sponsor in his office. We didn't do that much when I came in, but I started to hear some California people talk about that, and I thought, hell, I'm going to dot the I's and cross the T's. And then I went to him, and I wanted to start my 4th step. I did my first 2 5th steps with clergy. And this one I wanted to do with my sponsor, which is also what I started to see a pattern changing, because everybody in our group did it with clergy. And I did my 4th step. I think it's the best inventory I ever took because of the level of pain that I was in. There just were no conditions as to what I was going to share. I went to my sponsor when I went to do the 5th step, and I said, I should be careful. I said, I feel like I'm dying of thirst lying next to a lake. If you came to my house with my problems and shared it with me, I could tell you what to do. I just can't or won't do it. I am so bloody tired of can't or won't do it that I could just spit, and I'm ready to do whatever you recommend to me that I do. I did my 5th step with him, and he said, look, you got a lot of problems around money, work, failure, and success. I want you to find a psychologist that works with business people. I'm a mailman. I want you to go have that conversation. I want you to bring the conversation back to me. I did not want to do that. That made it sound like I was different. I didn't have a good program. Hello. And so I get this psychologist recommended to me. I call him up. He said, well, you get your parents involved. I said, no. I said, my parents have been over-involved in my life. If you can't help me without getting my parents involved, find me someone who can. He said, well, you get your wife involved. I thought, oh, crap. Well, it's a very different conversation when your wife's in the room. I mean, there's a lot of information that seems extraneous. It's not necessary to the process. And it's confusing and a little embarrassing and probably more complete than I would have been if I were directing that process. And then he wanted to get the kids somewhat involved, and I thought that was stupid. But yes. So we started going to the psychologist. And we're in there about, 8 weeks, going to 1 or 2 times a week. I'm explaining to this guy that my company's in serious trouble, might have to file bankruptcy. And I don't know, I'm busting my ass 2 or 3 hours a day. And, I know, have fun. I know it doesn't happen out here. It's a Minnesota thing. Don't worry about it. And he looked at me and he said, why are you so afraid of failing? And I wanted to punch him. I'm not a fighter. I mean, I felt like he punched me is what I felt like. And I wanted to jack him. And I was just stunned. And I said, I've lived in this town all my life. I'm in the real estate investment business. They're going to put my name in the paper and I may have to go bankrupt. I said, you're a doctor. I'm going to lose everything I have. I said, you're a doctor. You go bankrupt, you just take your little sign, walk down the hall, pounding on another door. Within 6 months, you're making $100,000. I'm going to lose everything I have. Nod your head up and down if you understand that. And he looked at my wife, and he said, if Bob lost everything he had, would he lose you? My wife said, no, it wouldn't lose me. And then he asked the kids who happened to be there, and they, of course, said no. If you can't lose, you can't play. I'm a salesman who doesn't even take the chance of making a sales call that you could drag me across the desk and force me to sell you something, because I don't make sales calls. And 2 weeks, 10 days after that seminal meeting with that psychologist, I've got a really crappy day going. I went to work late, I left early, got in a backgammon game, I won $500, I missed dinner, I missed the A meeting, I came home, got in a fight with my wife and slapped one of the kids. One of those things you'd like to have videotaped and sent to the General Service Office to show what 8 years of sobriety could do. And I said, gee, it happened again. And I said, it happened? Weren't you there? Yeah, but it's like I'm in a blackout. I mean, it's so automatic. I don't even think about it. I'm in it before. It's like I catch myself on the hind end of it. And all of a sudden I realized that was a bunch of crap. My life was the way it was because I designed it that way. I sounded like a guy who wanted to quit gambling. I wanted to gamble whenever the hell I wanted to gamble for as much money as I wanted to gamble and not have problems because of gambling. I wanted money without work. I wanted my wife and children's love and affection without spending time with them. Not a very good design. And all of a sudden I realized that I had tried as hard as I knew how to try, imperfectly and ineffectively, to clean my act up, and I had failed. And I was given the opportunity to take the 6 and the 7 step. 6 step said we're entirely ready to have God remove our defects of character. 7 step said we humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings. I had spent 8 years trying to get rid of them. I do not have the power. I have the responsibility, but I'm the pipe, not the well. It happens through me, not by me. Doctor doesn't heal. He creates an aseptic environment, creates an atmosphere in which healing can take place and God heals. And I don't change. I create an atmosphere in which change can take place and God changes me. And for some reason, when I realized that I had tried as hard as I know how to try and failed, when I came to AA, I stood naked in front of my alcoholism and it altered me. That night, I stood naked in front of my life and it altered me. And when I got down on my knees to take a 6 and a 7 step, I realized that I needed some structure around that or it wasn't going to mean anything. And I must have gotten a little guidance. I turned the checkbook over to my wife. I did not want her knowing what was in the goddamn checkbook, but I turned it over, I turned my paycheck over, and she put me on an allowance, $100 a week. Still puts it out. I kind of feel like I'm kept. It's kind of a nice thing. And I'm actually up to 140, so. But for about 5 years, there was no extra money. I mean, later as business got better, I had access to money that wasn't going through my wife. But for 4 or 5 years, I had no access to any money out of that. Got rid of the credit cards, and then within about a year, she had this technique where she could pay half a bill. Damnedest thing I have ever seen. And she's a good money manager. Not all spouses are, but she was. I started to date my wife. I dated my wife every Friday night for the next 35 years. When I was out saving the world on Friday night, I dated her on Thursday or Sunday. I made appointments with my sponsor about going to work, staying at work, and working at work. I quit gambling that night. When you have a change, my life turned like it was on a turntable. It just, all of a sudden, the guy that didn't know how to work started to work, and not only did I start to work, I started to become effective. You know, whatever was holding me back, whatever I was not, which was fear. What I discovered in that psychiatrist's office, psychologist's office, fear. I'm swimming in fear, and I don't even know I have it. My fear inventory, we were not as technical with the book or as good as the book as we are today, and my fear inventory was what Sheldon was talking, dogs, snakes, and tall buildings. I'm afraid of work, I'm afraid of failure, I'm afraid of success, I'm afraid of being a father, I'm afraid of being a husband. I feel overwhelmed by what I'm 20, at that time I was 30 years old, but I'm like 22 or 23 maturity-wise. I mean, I'm sophisticated, but I'm, pathologically immature. I just, and I don't know this. And I don't know that I'm laden with fear. And But all of a sudden, my life turned around magically. And for the next 10 years, I made enough money to burn a wet elephant. It was just, now a lot of that was luck. It happened to be at the right time. It was real estate investment. It was, being successful in business has a certain element of luck. But, and then I started to have the issues with success. There's problems with failure, there's also a problem with success. I'm the guy with the brand new Mercedes driving with an expensive suit, walking into the meeting and think God had blessed me because of what a wonderful AA guy I was. How would you like me in your group? And, the arrogance is invisible to me because I don't think, And then in 1984, they passed the Tax Act. And between the mid-'80s and the late '80s, I lost $10 million. I lost my house. I had my house paid for. Had $1 million in the bank. My dad always had this cautionary kind of view of what I was doing. And I'd say, just relax, everything's fine. I could quit tomorrow, everything's good. And it wasn't good, it wasn't stable. And when they passed that Tax Act, it imploded all the banks most of the banks in the United States and all the real estate companies. All of us, it was the largest drop in real estate values since the Great Depression. It didn't affect home ownership, but it affected commercial real estate. And I lost everything I had. And I just literally couldn't believe it. So the reason I've kind of gotten into this story and this process is, number one, I think the experience I went through at 8 years is an experience that almost everybody goes through somewhere between 5 and 15 years in Alcoholics Anonymous. The first 3 years, we're focused on the consequences of our use. We're trying to put the structure back together, get a car, get insurance, get a job, get a woman, or a man or whatever. Start your relationships, get back in the house, get back in the big bed. We've got all the sorts of things that we want to have happen, and our eyes are on those things fairly strongly, and it is astounding what people go through and what they do, and it's really attractive in the first couple of years of sobriety. I look at what some of those people are doing today, and I'm damn glad that I'm not going through what they're going through, because I'm not sure I'd be strong enough to go through it. But you can't get it all done in 2 years. I mean, there are a second level of things going on that you did not know anything about. And those are inhibitory towards having a long-term relationship rather than an affair, to having a career rather than a job, to getting the full measure of what recovery offers us. And if you don't deal with those things and start to find out what they were, if we don't continue the inventory process, which Sheldon was talking about imperfectly, we are, but if we don't continue that process, we're going to stagnate. And if you continue that process at all, and even if you don't, somewhere between 5 and 15 years, you're going to get your ass handed to you, in my opinion. And you are going to have to, when Bill wrote the 12 and 12, he said, I wrote the 12 and 12 to broaden and deepen the relationship with the steps. He said, I kept seeing people who were depressed and angry and were not doing very well all around me in Alcoholics Anonymous that were sober, 5 to 15 years. And so I wrote those essays on the steps to try to deepen and broaden their relationship with the steps, which is exactly what most of us have to do on an ongoing basis to maintain our spiritual condition. If we're really active in the program and we're active in ongoingly taking the steps, you are going to be revealed to yourself. When Sheldon talked about his heresy about that he doesn't think the steps by themselves are enough, I would very much agree with that. That the fellowship and the structure and the service and all that sort of thing it's hard to distinguish. Now, our practice is the 12 steps. But we have other practices in the program that are very necessary. And they're almost, if you go through and take the steps and you've had that change, you're going to do service. People don't have to tell you to do service. You will have changed in such a way that you will just automatically do service because you're not going to be as self-centered as you. Been talking a lot about change and improvement. I saw a quote in one of my meditation books, and it says, "Wisdom means to be changed without the slightest effort on our part, to be transformed merely by waking to reality, a reality beyond words." If someone grabbed most of us that have been sober a dozen years and said, "How'd you do it?" Yeah, we might give them 5 minutes on it. But the fact is the quick answer is we don't know. Because it's of God. It is so big, it is so profound, it is so different, we don't know. It is words, you can point to it, you can surround it, but you can't contain it in words. And that's what, that's the conversation that we're having. We're asking people to bring their wet logs to the, damp logs to the bonfire of AA. And we're going to gather 700 people in a room and we're going to have a conversation about God and recovery. It is, and how do you contain what God is? How do you contain what transformation is? How do you contain what recovery is? It is literally beyond. We do the very best we know how. And for most of us, the language of the heart is a conversation that we're all familiar with and all have a connection to. We know when it's a very broad conversation. And what I love about it is that in most cases, it's not a correct conversation. It's not a dogmatic conversation. It's not and Sheldon talked about that too. It is, there isn't just one way to go through this process. We have more teaching on the 12 steps today than we've ever had at any time in our recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous. And there's some of the more strict groups, the more structured groups, would give you the impression if you're not doing it correctly, you're in trouble. And if you're not doing it correctly, you're not a very good member of Alcoholics Anonymous. You would never have heard that message in the first 20 or 25 or 35 years I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous. If a guy was going to meetings and sober, we were pretty happy for him. And if you were close to him, if he wasn't doing the deal at home, or if he was really a jerk, people would talk to him, or, like we do now with each other. But now we're starting to grade each other in how we do AA. And I'd like to report that doing AA is a hell of a lot easier than doing life. If you're married, got a job, and you have children, give me a break. Is there anybody knocking it out of the park all the time with that setup? But the arrogance, because what people are, to me, what they're saying is, I know how to do it. I know what the correct way to do it is. I'm saying, how's your demonstration? That's the question. How's your demonstration? How much of what you talk about can you put on the road on an ongoing basis that's real? And the people that and many of the group that were presenters this weekend, I'm close to. And it's a privilege being close to. I've really had fun. The last number of years with Lee and with Jimmy and with Tom and the different, with Bill and it's just a privilege. And Tony, it's just a privilege to have those kinds of relationships. And the relationships are with players. You don't have to be perfect for me. That has never been, but you have to be a player, unless you're new. You got to have a helmet, a uniform, you got to be in the game. You got to, whatever throws it at you. You always hear these things about, I don't know if I've had a spiritual awakening. Two of the most profound spiritual awakenings that most of us in this room have had. Number one, new guy. You make the mistake of asking the new guy how he is. What does he do? He gives you the dump. You know, the car, the insurance, the money, the judge, gives you the dump. Same guy, 3 months later, in the program, starting to do the steps, and you ask him how he is. Oh, I'm okay. I was a little nuts on Tuesday, but I'm okay. Same circumstance. Nothing has changed. But what has changed is he's gone from being at the effect of the circumstances to being at cause in his own life. He's gone from being a victim to a volunteer. He is now a participant, and his view of his job on an ongoing basis now is how he responds to what the hell's going on, whatever's in front of him, which is all our job. How you doing with what's coming down the pipe? You know, most of us are still at the faucet trying to push the water back, and we haven't found the little handle. So that's a spiritual awakening. That's a transformation. That's a major alteration in the way we see life. That's what Jung was talking about, and that's what Silkworth was talking about. Number two, the journey from 4 to 9, from your resentment list to your amends list. I mean, if you explained that on the front end to most people, they really would balk even more at that process, and they would think that it was unavailable, unacceptable. Sheldon, again, talked about that quite a bit. But we take that trip almost invisibly. And by the time we're doing step 9, after we've done, when we've made the decision in 3, which many people think has made the decision to do 4 through 9, it's just the right next thing to do. And it makes sense. Why does it make sense? It's because you've gone through a transformation. You're not the same person. The person who is now doing 9 is a different person than the person who started 4. They're just more in the game. They're more mature. They're more open. It's a different, they have all that kind of sense. And those are extraordinary changes. I mean, where the hell else, we kind of talk automatically that we expect that we can take someone in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we're in the business of spiritual transformation. I mean, you say that in words. I mean, it sounds goofy. It sounds way beyond what's possible. I mean, if you wanted someone to have a spiritual transformation, where would you bring them? And we expect that on a regular basis. Now, the first, you just have to burn your life down to the ground, because you just really have to have the surrender that Tom talked about when he did this lovely presentation on the 3 things. The gift, if we ask most of us what's the largest gift in your life, most of us would say AA, but the fact is our surrender, the collapse of our lives. Most of us, when we hit bottom, for the first few times we bounced back, but there was a time when you hit bottom and a trap door opened and we kept going. And when that happened, baby, we had an unconditional experience. And that opening, that being cracked open, gave us the opportunity to interact, to learn. All of a sudden, the guy who wasn't open to any information from anybody who was on his case is going to 5 meetings a week, is reading the book, is asking someone, thinking about asking someone or ask someone to be their sponsor, and they're starting to interact with the steps. I mean, that's not a small change. So when Bill talks about after step 3, when he talks about first we get well spiritually and then, emotionally and physically, I always thought that was backwards. It's not backwards. That change from going from the machete-carrying, reluctant, over-defended, angry person to the person who is now going to meetings, getting a sponsor, reading the book, starting to do the deal as newcomers would do it, something spiritual's happened to the person. And we would not even for many of us, that almost wouldn't occur. But the old timers look at that and they think, someone lit that guy's pilot light. We'll put up a little cardboard around that sumbitch so it doesn't blow out, and it'll be okay. I get asked to talk to a lot of guys who are sober more than a dozen years, and some quite a bit more than a dozen years, who come to me whose life isn't very good. And they want something more than they have. And they don't know, and they know that I'm a real active member of Alcoholics Anonymous, so I'm gonna, there's probably, the meeting I go to, my home group on Monday nights, a couple of hundred people, and there's probably 10 of us in that group that have a fair amount of sobriety, and there might be 10 of us that you would go to if your, life was, looking kind of dull. And what I find is that most of those people do not have a spiritual dimension to their life. And it's a hard conversation, so I want to take the last little bit and talk about, and there's two reasons why I think we end up, if you skate through that change that I had at 7 years and don't have it, you build an addition onto your house to accommodate the problem. You still have that 12-year-old girl tied up in the garage, or, you do not, but you start making a deal. You start hanging out with the guys and you say, look, you don't call me on my crap, I won't call you on your. We'll talk about the steps, the traditions, we'll go to meetings, we'll do the deal. You stay out of my face, I'll stay out of yours. Deal? Bad deal. But a lot of people make a deal like that. Your sponsor knows what you're willing to talk about, what you're not willing to talk about. The fact is, we are enormously resistant to change. We are so mind-bound that our thinking is our identity. We really think the ideas we have is who we are. It's part of our personality. I've always thought that way. I've always been that way. It's like that's not changeable. It's just a given. You can change your car, it doesn't change who the hell you are. Why would you? But our internal system is we're so identified with that, it's like we're going to die if we do significantly change who we think we are. And recovery and transformation is exactly that process, is changing who you think you are. The good news is, it's automatic. What we do in Alcoholics Anonymous, which I think is just the greatest trick in the world. First of all, we don't spend any time on the problem. We assume that you stop drinking. We don't talk much about alcoholism. We talk about recovery. Our focus is on the problem. Our focus is on the solution, not the problem. That is so brilliant. And it's funny because if Bill was a scientific guy and he kind of prided himself on his technical background, he could have got lodged in that heavily, and he didn't. The fact that Bob and Bill came up with not being too strong in church was just the greatest gift that we've ever had in Alcoholics Anonymous, the God of our understanding. I think whoever said it, that we wouldn't have our fellowship today. Without question, we wouldn't have our fellowship today if we had a theology or a dogma that we had to attend to. The freedom that we have is just extraordinary. And again, that transformation, most of us just kind of, go to a lot of meetings, you just get seeped into a God conversation. And it isn't like we're trying to get you to shave your heads and sell books at the airport. It just is the only conversation. There is no other conversation. I don't know how the hell I missed that for 7 years, because I was more focused on the activity. I was more focused on what I had to do. I was more focused on behavior. When after that 7-year period, my maintenance of my spiritual condition had so much more to do, and this is an old man talking to some degree, it's a gift. And I submit that you would go about the process of getting ready to accept a gift differently than you'd go about the process of grabbing your life by the throat, finding the tips. You've got your hands in the control, and you're going to manage your recovery process. So when I see people who are stuck, first of all, they're stuck because They bumped up against, they grew as far as they could grow without getting rid of the one or two things that are their treasures, the things that they're unwilling to really deal with, whether it's their anger or whether it's sexual or whether it's money or whatever it is. But usually it's at least one of them is involved with secrets. And there are treasures, you know. But the longer you're around, I mean, people will tell you they aren't treasures. They're dog turds wrapped in gold tinfoil. They are not, you know, they look like, my gambling was, I mean, you know, I won the first tournament we had, I had an identity around my gambling. I thought I was a good backgammon player, and it was just so stupid I could hardly explain it after I started to get my life together and after I started to work and I found out my skill in the area that my business was in. The joy and fun I had in my business after I got going with that was like Sheldon was talking about. It was marvelous. One of the magical things about Alcoholics Anonymous, so most of us, as Bill said, we're people of the problem. We're problem people. It seems like all our life we're being exposed to something, and for many of us, our experience in Alcoholics Anonymous, and sometimes when you're listening to some of us old guys, we feel like we're trying to tell you a process that's going to get you better. Is there anybody tired of getting better? Is there anybody tired about throwing the son of a bitch halfway to the wall for the rest of your life and never getting there? I mean, what we really have to offer is transformation, not improvement, not a new idea. I mean, there's lots of new ideas. But what Alcoholics Anonymous does is removes the impediment and allows the person to discover the goodness that has always been there. So the journey isn't onward and upward. The journey's come home. Come home. That's all God's saying to you. Come all the way in. Sit all the way down. Come home. You're not under-equipped. What if what God wants for you, most of my life this would have sounded like an impossibility. What if what God really wants for you is what you want for you? What if we really have two operating systems? One is the ego, which we sometimes talk about getting rid of, which is it's a spacesuit. You need it for the trip. Okay, you can't get rid of the damn thing, but it's, you can make it a junior partner. Okay, rather than giving it control, rather than giving it dominance, rather than giving it our identity. Once you start taking away your identity from your ego, it's done. And once you enter, what if we have intact another operating system? What if God, aside from the fact that from the theology of, I'm having a senior moment, I can't grab a word, but the theology of that he manifested himself, as Christians believe, in Jesus, or as Jews believe in Yahweh. What if, aside from the manifestation of that, what if what God is the manifestation of everything we see around us? What if it really is everything? What if we could escape this idea, when you listen to the conversations we have about God holding us in his hand, helping us, you know, we so make God a person that we just almost can't have an appreciation. We just assign him in that process the limitations that we bring to that process. I mean, what if it was so big we couldn't even, what if it was everything? And what if we had an operating system within us that was God? Not everything that God was, but what if, what if everything we were was God? What if there was a place in us where there's just total unity with what we call our higher power? I mean,